Hello, my name is Ian Crichton, and I'm the Vice President of Mission Support and Spiritual Life for Acts Retirement Life Communities. If you're anything like me, over the past few months, I've been trying to figure out exactly what God's trying to teach us through this COVID pandemic. I've been trying to sort of analyze what's His purpose behind this. And I think that's a perfectly natural tendency. But I want to suggest to you that our drive to understand what God's trying to teach us, or our drive to try to understand His purpose behind this difficult circumstance, to some extent, I think, clouds the validity of simply expressing our sadness. Simply lamenting the circumstances that we find ourselves in. And I think there's great value in lamenting, quite apart from trying to understand the lessons, or quite apart from trying to understand the purpose when God brings these circumstances into our lives. I think God appreciates our expressions of lamenting or lamentation. Let me give you a couple of examples. I'm often intrigued by the way Jesus responded initially to the news that Lazarus had died. That short verse in the Bible, the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Apparently that was His first reaction. Rather than explaining to Mary and Martha the purpose behind it and His plans and purpose in allowing Lazarus to die, Jesus responded simply by lamenting. He wept. Romans chapter 8 contains so much, but there is a section in Romans 8 where Paul talks about the suffering that we're experiencing. And the fact that oftentimes when we find ourselves in difficult circumstances, we simply don't know how to pray. But then he says the Spirit in those circumstances comes alongside of us and intercedes for us with wordless groans. To some extent, the Spirit recognizes our suffering and affirms our lamentation. And Paul doesn't say that the Spirit knows the language that will help us through those circumstances, the language that God will understand, but there's a sense in which the Spirit simply connects with us through wordless groans, those expressions of misunderstanding, those expressions of sadness. As we cry, as we express our grief and our frustration, Paul would suggest that the Spirit also comes alongside with us and shares our tears, and shares our grief, and shares with us our expressions of frustration, wordless groans. So again, as we find ourselves in these circumstances, perhaps our initial reaction shouldn't be to try to figure out what God's trying to teach us, trying to understand God's purpose behind this. Or perhaps we ought to follow our Lord's example and simply weep. Perhaps we ought to follow Paul's example, as again he references the ministry of the Spirit, who comes alongside of us with wordless groans and express to the Lord our deep frustration, our deep sadness, and our grief. Perhaps it's time for us to revive the important ministry of lamenting, the important ministry of lamentations. I think it blesses God, and I think it will bless us as well.